Well, now we want to bring attention to a movement called Idle No More that's taking place in Canada. It was started by 4 women and calls on people to protect the land and water by protecting the rights of Canada's Indigenous people. It's a movement that's gaining steam and even inspired protests across the country. Some of those involved say it's directly connected to others around the world, including the Occupy movement and the Arab Spring and other recent uprisings. Ora Bogado writes about racial justice, native rights, and immigration for The Nation and joins me now to talk more about this. And what is it about Idle No More that's really not only caught the attention, but really caught the great support from so many people across the world?
Well, I think that we hear a lot about the environment, and I think that this really is an environmental justice issue, and we need to think about the way that Native Americans and Indigenous people in general are always disproportionately negatively affected by environmental degradation. I mean, this comes with the history of colonization and the global north being able to really reap the resources and the land of so many nations. We see that hundreds of years later, it's really global south nations, indigenous global south nations, that stand to imminently and permanently lose their homelands. And if we bring it to a place like the U.S., we're seeing the same thing here. The history of colonization here meant that a lot of people benefited from the land and resources, and a lot of people lost out in that process, Native people in particular, because it was their land.
Absolutely. Ora Bogado, a blogger with The Nation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Christine.
Hi there, I'm Darren Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
We're broadcasting from downtown Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada on January the 1st, 2014.
That's right. 2013 was this year of amazing pushbacks against the corporate state.
We saw Hungary kick the IMF out, Hawaii kick Monsanto out.
And of course, in Canada, we had our very own movement.
Right here, Idle No More, they pushed back in a huge way, and then some politics occurred. But we're not here to talk about that. What do we got?
Right. Well, the Canadian court has decided to allow the Ecuadorians, who are being countersued by Chevron, to get a hearing in the Canadian court to decide the fate of their complaint against Chevron in Texaco.
So if you ever think that protesting doesn't work, we're here to tell you otherwise. We want you to check this out.
Nearly every single person who's been named as a defendant in Chevron's retaliatory RICO suit has loved ones, has family members who've died, who've contracted cancer, who've suffered from birth defects and other oil-related illness due to Chevron's contamination. This lawsuit essentially rubs salt in their wounds.
Talk about the significance of this decision.
The importance of the decision in Canada is that for the first time, the Ecuadorian plaintiffs will be able to go before the judiciary of a third country, not Ecuador, not the United States, and say, we have a legitimate judgment in Ecuador, multiple billions of dollars, and we believe it should be enforced. And we want you, the judiciary of Canada, to respect the judiciary of Ecuador and allow us to literally seize the operations of Chevron in this country.
What assets could be seized?
Well, you're talking about refineries, Chevron's ownership in operations, for example, in Western Canada in the tar sands area, and bank accounts, and any assets that could then be sold off and offset against this multi-billion-dollar verdict in Ecuador.
Now, the verdict in Ecuador has gone up the entire chain of the court system in that country,
Sure.
right? What is, in essence, the main claims of Chevron about that verdict in particular?
Because Chevron said the 2011 judgment against Chevron, the company says, was the product of corruption, that you had outside American lawyers cooperating with Ecuadorian lawyers and corrupt Ecuadorian judges to put together what amounts to a sham. And that's the argument you're going to hear in the Canadian courts, because while the Canadians have said, we will hear this argument, they have not said, we're going to rule for the Ecuadorians. They've said, we're going to give you an opportunity to make your argument. And Chevron's argument on the other side is, this is all a sham.
So you got to understand that, of course, the corporations are going to push back when they lose some profit, which is just creepy and strange.
But people are waking up and realizing that we have the power.
And you've got to make sure you exercise that power by getting informed first, letting that passion grow, because that's what they can't do, and then standing up for what's logical and right.
That's right. The corporatocracy is failing, and people in the U.S. are waking up to the fact that they're getting ripped off.
You know, the guys who are actual fast food workers,
the fastest growing sector in the U.S. jobs market.
Yeah, which is tragic when you say that.
Yeah.
They're pushing back in the States. Check this out.
What began here in New York City 1 year ago with just 200 employees has exploded into arguably the biggest wave of protest in the history of America's fast food industry. Thousands of fast food employees in more than 100 cities throughout this country have walked off the job Thursday, demanding an increase in minimum wage and the right to unionize. Now, this movement is being spearheaded by an organization called Fast Food Forward. And the fast food workers that have joined this strike work at major restaurants like Wendy's, McDonald's, Burger King, and KFC. Now, while fast food remains a $200 billion industry, the median wage for the service workers like the cooks and the cashiers and the crew nationwide is just $8.94 an hour. Here in New York City, it's even worse, with the minimum wage being $7.25 an hour. Now, because of the low wages, many of the employees, if not most, employed at fast food restaurants are living in poverty. Now, what these protesters are demanding is that minimum wage be raised to $15 an hour. So far, only one city in Washington state has met those demands. This crowd around me, they're doing so to fight for a basic and decent living wage, an opportunity to just step 1 foot into the world of the so-called American dream.
Now, that's something I never thought.
15 bucks an hour for fast food, though. That keeps up with production and the rise in the cost of living.
Yeah, okay. You know, they can afford to pay $15 an hour. It would cost you another dime on your fries, but, you know, major corporations have been running poverty-level operations for so long, they just can't seem to get over it.
Yeah, and also we have the movement for the Walmart workers and other retail workers.
Oh, man. Way to go, Walmart workers. We are so there to back you up. Looking around the world, we had a major GMO crisis, a series of problems in a series of countries that stood up and said no to having their food destroyed.
Yeah, we had our monstrous march against Monsanto here all over the world, actually.
Yeah, we joined up right here in Kelowna. We had about 340 people show up for our march, but in Hawaii, they did something amazing. Check this out.
Now, a Hawaiian island has passed a law banning companies which produce genetically modified food from operating on its territory. And modified crops will also be restricted to indoor structures, and experimenting with new types of plants has been prohibited. But Elizabeth Kucinich from the Center for Food Safety, she believes the anti-GMO mood is beginning to reverberate all across the world.
This is actually a movement which is spreading across the country. This move actually is the second this week in Hawaii. There's the ban, obviously, on the Big Island, but also another piece of legislation that was passed in Kauai, which severely restricts GMOs and makes the chemical companies regulate and report the chemicals that they're using on the land. There are a couple of states in the country that have actually passed labeling laws, except they have a clause in them that says that other states have to join them before the laws are actually enacted. So this is a big movement that's happening, not only in the United States, but particularly all across the rest of the world. People are wanting to have a healthier, more pure source of food.
So Monsanto is having its problems around the world.
And it actually had an entire beet harvest burnt up down in California, and they're still looking for the guys.
Yeah, you know.
Kind of makes me laugh. Right here in the Okanagan, we're going to be fighting an apple war, and that one is coming up right away. Finishing things off, we have to take a look at Colorado and Washington.
They legalized marijuana, and stores are opening up this month.
And those stores are currently sucking away huge amounts of cash and dropping dope prices right across Western Canada. Go figure. However,
it's nice to see when an entire country realizes the failure of the war on drugs policy.
It's so awesome. Check this out.
So in the last few years, Uruguay has got itself a reputation for being one of the most progressive nations on this little planet of ours. And now they've become the first country in the world to listen to Peter Tosh and legalize it. That's legalizing the growing, smoking and selling of weed. The Congress in Montevideo passed legislation that will allow Uruguayans to buy it from registered pharmacies. They'll be able to pick up to 1.4 ounces in a month. But to stop Uruguay turning into the prime tourist destination for potheads around the world, it's only available to people who have citizenship there. But even then, it only just passed. There was a 12-hour debate in Congress over the bill, which was proposed by President Jose Mujica. And even then, it was just 16 votes to 13. The government reckons it'll help to tackle drugs cartels and say it's a response to the failures of the war on drugs. Critics of the law have been arguing that it will expose more people to drugs and have accused the government of using the Uruguayan people as guinea pigs in a social experiment. Then there's the International Narcotics Control Board, which has warned Uruguay that the law is in complete contravention of international drug treaties to which Uruguay is a party. To which the response is, well, yes, but those treaties are failing. Shouldn't we try something new? Anyway, this was the reaction when the law passed.
Okay, so it was Uruguay.
Well, the people, South America.
South America. It's a country that I want to visit right now because we're freezing outside.
And you know, you can actually buy dope legally if you're a citizen and a resident of Uruguay.
Yes. So good for them. Way to go. Maybe the other governments could grow up. I'm Darren Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
We've got more coming up as we talk about the Canadian Conservatives.
And
a stellar year for the Canadian Conservatives. So make sure you stay tuned. And thanks for joining us. It's Video Radio.
And that's it. Happy New Year. We'll see you in our next segment.
They've solved the riddle of extracting oil from the saturated sands of northern Alberta, but they're still working on finding ways of getting that oil to Asian markets. One proposed solution, Enbridge's Northern Gateway pipeline, which would bring Alberta oil to the BC coast, recently got the green light from a review panel. But a much tougher fight is looming, because the pipeline runs through 45 Aboriginal communities. Aboriginal opposition to the pipeline is already loud and clear. A number of First Nations have signed this declaration, saying they won't allow the pipeline to cross their territory. Backing this up will be lawsuits, and the argument will be a simple one.
If they can prove their Aboriginal rights in court, and if those rights are shown to be incompatible with this pipeline, then the pipeline has to give way.
First Nations worry about the pipeline's effects on wildlife, but their biggest fear is an oil spill. The federal government has promised to consult First Nations, but they believe Ottawa will eventually approve the project. So they see the courts as their best option to stop the pipeline, but they know it won't be an easy fight.
This is a David and Goliath struggle that's shaping up, one that is going to be pitting the little guy against all the big guys. And that's not an easy struggle to win, but the First Nations are courageous. They have the law on their side. They have the moral high ground on their side.
Lawsuits and protests could bog down the Northern Gateway project at a time when the expanding oil sands needs more pipeline capacity as quickly as possible.